Good evening and welcome to the second installment of our three-part series on Muslims in Brooklyn, Growing Up and Fitting In. My name is Caitlin Holt and I'm the Manager of Education at Brooklyn Public Library Center for Brooklyn History. Today I'm joined by fellow colleagues from the education team at CBH, as well as curriculum authors and educators, Dr. Habiba, Noor, and Alex Tronolone, who you can see waving right now. Before we get started, we'd like to get to know you all a little bit more and each other. So we thought we might launch a few polls to warm up. If you look at your screen, one should pop up in just a moment. So where are you joining us from today? Are you from New York City, New York State, or have you come from somewhere else? Great, so the majority of us are from the city, although very curious to know where some of our non-city people are from, if you want to share in the chat. On to the next poll. What subject do you teach the most? English, social studies? Are you a librarian? Maybe you do something else altogether. Wow, it looks like the majority of our participants today do something else. Again, if you want to share in the chat, we would love to hear more. Okay, for the next poll, what grade do you work with the most? And you can select multiple choices if you want. Looks like a nice spread here. Great. So yeah, pretty even between the different levels. Okay. And have you previously used oral histories while teaching? Since this is the focus of today, we're just interested to know where you've all come from in this respect. All right, so it looks like the majority said no, or I'm not sure. So that means that we have a lot of exciting things to teach you today, and we're really pleased that you're here with us. Okay. And then I think do we have one more? I can't remember. The last question we were going to ask is, in your current work, are you teaching mostly in person, mostly remote, a mix of the two? You can always share that in the chat as well. Looks like a lot of people are teaching remote. Oh, a mix. Okay. Yeah, mostly remote. Good. Well, we hope that you'll walk away with some fantastic tools today for teaching with oral histories online. Our educators are going to really wow you with what we have in store. Alrighty. So I'd like to commence the official proceedings of today's session by acknowledging that the Center for Brooklyn History stands on land that is part of the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware people. As a sign of respect, we recognize and honor the Lenape Delaware nations, their elders past and present, and future generations. We are committed to addressing exclusions and erasure of Indigenous people and confronting the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism in our work. The objectives of today's session are to gain insight into the diverse experiences of Muslim New Yorkers and to take away lesson plan ideas for incorporating culturally relevant perspectives, oral histories, and resources from the Muslims in Brooklyn project into curriculum. Participants who successfully complete the session will be able to submit their information for 1.5 or 1.5 CTLE credits upon completing the evaluation survey at the end of today's session. So please stick with us to the end if you would like to ask for CTLE credit. You can follow our agenda and access today's supplemental materials in the digitized session booklet shared in advance via email, as well as through a link that my colleague is placing in the chat feature. And before we get started, I'm going to share some housekeeping instructions and review the code of conduct for today's session. First, if you haven't done so already, please add your name and pronouns to your profile. You can do this by clicking on the participants icon at the bottom of your window. Find and hover over your name in the participants list on the right side of the Zoom window. You can click more and then rename from the options provided. Then you can edit your name and add your pronouns. For instance, they, them, she, her, he, him. You get the idea. You'll notice that for now, we've muted all participants in order to prevent unintentional audio feedback and disruptions during the program. Therefore, we strongly encourage you to use the chat feature to share your ideas, comments, and questions. Staff will closely monitor the chat and be on hand to provide technical assistance if needed. They can offer clarification and they'll respond to your concerns. They'll also use the chat feature to share resources referenced in the presentation and to collate questions for the question and answer portion of today's session. So you can access the chat feature by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of your window. And there will be opportunities for Q&A during which you can raise the hand icon, which should be next to your name in the participants list. There's like the 3 little dots and you can click on that to raise your hand. And you can possibly share questions with our speakers directly by doing that. We're committed to ensuring all of our events, activities, and materials are accessible to all individuals, including those with disabilities. Therefore, captioning is available during today's session and can be enabled by clicking on the closed caption icon at the bottom of your window. You can always email our staff with your preferred communication method at connections@bklynlibrary.org if you require other accessibility accommodations. Lastly, we want you to be aware that this session is being recorded and will be shared after the session concludes. By participating with your camera on, you have consented to being recorded. If you do not consent to being recorded, please turn off your camera. And you can also refrain from verbally sharing your ideas, comments, and questions. Anything that's shared through the chat will not be disseminated, so that is okay. And now for our code of conduct. Our events are intended to create a space that nurtures a community of educators that is inclusive of all, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, age, sexual orientation, ability, or stage of professional development. All attendees are expected to show respect to our presenters, organizers, and of course, other attendees. This event will contain discussion about issues related to race, bias, and oppression that can be difficult to talk about. As an attendee, you may at times feel uncomfortable with the issues and opinions shared. So if you find yourself struggling with the topic of discussion, it's totally fine to walk away from your computer, take a break. It is not appropriate to respond by showing hateful ideologies, racist language, or confrontational viewpoints. Hateful and racist behavior will be considered a violation of the code of conduct and result in immediate expulsion from the event. So we ask you to please actively listen, be sensitive to the anxieties and concerns of your fellow participants, and show support for one another. Again, if you need help, use the chat feature to reach out to us. And especially if you have concerns about another participant's behavior, you can privately message staff through the chat feature if your concern is sensitive by looking for the word co-host beside our name in the participant list. So just message us directly. I would now like to introduce today's speakers and the authors of the Muslim in Brooklyn curriculum, Dr. Habiba Noor and Alex Tronolone. Dr. Noor is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work lies at the intersection of media studies, religious studies, and education. She's an instructor in the Department of Education in Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, where she teaches courses on social justice and urban education. Prior to this, she worked as a public middle school teacher in Oakland, California, and New York City, and has extensive experience in curriculum development in K-12 and higher education. She wrote the curriculum for Muslims in Brooklyn Oral History Project for the Brooklyn Historical Society, along with Alex Tronolone, our next speaker. Alex is a lifelong New Yorker and a proud New York City public school graduate. He received his bachelor's degree in history from NYU and his master's in teaching urban adolescents with disabilities from Long Island University as a New York City teaching fellow. His professional focus is on designing programs to help educators understand how the humanities can be used to examine our civic past in order to better map our civic future. Alex currently serves on the steering committee of the Museums, Arts, and Cultural Access Consortium, an organization striving toward increasing access to New York City's cultural institutions for the disability community through connection, education, and advocacy. Alex also previously served on the board of the New York City Museum Educator Roundtable, which is a forum for museum education professionals to address meaningful issues and exchange and disseminate best practices within the sector. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to our educators. Thank you all.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks, Kaylin.
Thank you.
Habiba, I'll start with just describing the project and then I'll hand it off. So, hi, I'm Alex. It's so hard not to hear everyone. I just wanted to shout out, I'm in Staten Island right now. So hello from the 5th. And I'm a special education teacher. I'm working at an independent school for students with special needs. So I just wanted to represent my special ed folks who I saw in the chat there. I was the project director for the curriculum here at Brooklyn Historical Society. And so I just wanted to give a word about the Muslims in Brooklyn project, which was a 3-year project that launched in the year 2017 that collected over 50 oral histories of Muslims living in Brooklyn. The project was built on 3 premises. Muslims in Brooklyn have a long history. They've been a part of American life since before the nation's founding, and established Muslim communities have been in Brooklyn for over a century. The second premise, Muslims in Brooklyn are a diverse people. The lives and work of Muslims in Brooklyn span many ethnicities, cultures, and nationalities. And finally, Muslims in Brooklyn are Brooklynites. Muslims have both shaped and been shaped by life in Brooklyn. In addition to collecting the 50 oral histories, the project also created educational programs, a sound and art exhibition, public programming, parts of the podcast, a publication, and this website and curriculum, which Habiba and I are really excited to share a portion of with you today. Habiba is our curriculum writer, and she's going to introduce you to the Growing Up and Fitting In lesson and how it fits into a larger dialogue about culturally responsive pedagogy before we start getting into the activities.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. And I am talking to you from Texas, really far away, missing New York a lot. So just a bit about, these oral histories that we collected as far as Muslims in Brooklyn project is each of these oral histories is about an hour, between an hour and 2 hours long. Typically, oral histories are gathered to fill in a historical archive. And the audience of oral histories are often historians or maybe, people like writers, journalists. They are not typically K through 12 students. So what we did with this curriculum was to find ways to make these stories, these narrations, palatable to younger audiences. And so the first step that we did in this curriculum was to go through this vast archive and find little clips and then design this curriculum around that. So I just want to connect this to sort of the broader umbrella ideas of this lesson, which is kind of situated within culturally relevant pedagogy. And just to kind of review some of the big ideas, this idea of culturally relevant pedagogy, which is, it's something that we've all heard about, but just to kind of review what it is, because I think that this lesson really links well with this, or this whole project links well with culturally relevant pedagogy. It's a concept coined by Gloria Ladson-Billings in 1994. And really what it is a philosophical approach to learning that centralizes the student, culture, and the experience of the people in the project of learning, right? So it centralizes people, and all people have culture, right? If we could go on to the next slide. I think that some of the 3 central pillars of culturally relevant pedagogy are, number 1, academic achievement, right? The goal here is to be academically engaged And one of the ways of doing that is to have cultural competence. And the cultural competency is not just for students. It's not something that we are teaching them, but it's something that as educators, we seek to have cultural competency. So I think that this workshop and the series of workshops is important because it can also help shed light on lives of Muslims in Brooklyn, which extends, I think yes, these oral histories tell us about Brooklyn, but I think they go beyond Brooklyn, and they tell us also about the experience of living as Muslim, I think even in the United States, but from diverse backgrounds. And also another key factor for culturally relevant pedagogy is this idea of social political consciousness, that we bring this political consciousness into the classroom and into the curriculum. And I have this picture here of a mirror and a window. And I think that the idea behind culturally relevant pedagogy is not just to see like culture as something separate from us and we are learning a separate culture, or that you always have to bring your own culture into the school, which is, I think, is very important with culturally relevant pedagogy. This idea that there's both, right? Like we say this in literature, that the study of literature, that literature can be a mirror where you're seeing yourself in it, which is very valuable, and one has to have mirrors, but also windows where you can see into the lives of others. And so I think that this theme of mirrors and windows is something that we are going to get into throughout this lesson. I want to kind of move on and talk about the lesson that we're dealing with today. And also, actually, before I do that, just a little bit about oral history. So oral history is, these are pictures of our oral historians that were at the Brooklyn Historical Society working with individuals in Brooklyn. And, something that Zahira Ali, the project director for Muslims in Brooklyn, says is that not everyone is a storyteller, but everyone has a story to tell. So I think an important component about oral histories is that oral histories are co-authored with the interviewer and the narrator, and together they are authors of these stories. And so what you will hear today is a product of both, right? The interviewer that's eliciting a story from these people. And so yeah, moving on. I want to talk about this lesson. This week's lesson for this particular workshop is under the theme called Growing Up and Fitting In. And we identified this theme because in many of these oral histories, we found that when people are talking about their life stories, they talk about their childhood and the struggles or the pleasures that they had in growing up. And we created a mini collection, which you can find on the website, of a range of experiences of growing up. Many of them are relatable, many of them are not relatable. But again, back to this idea that we have very different experiences growing up. So I think this lesson touches on two big sort of objectives. One is that of social emotional learning, right? We think about the struggles of growing up and thinking about how we can put words to people's emotions. And another is that we are looking at these oral history clips as like literary texts, right? So we are approaching it as though it's like a short story. And so, Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move on to the clip or beginning the lesson?
Just a kind of meta point about the whole, that this isn't a curriculum that's going to teach you about Islam.
Yeah. Yes.
I can do it, or you can.
That's a very important point. Yes. So, I think some of you are coming in for different reasons. This collection and this curriculum is not designed to teach people about Islam. This collection is a collection of stories where Muslims are a part of the broader story of experiences of your neighbors around, New York and elsewhere. There are many resources that can help you teach about Islam. That's not the goal here. And I think with culturally relevant pedagogy, the idea is that we see different cultures, different groups, different religions just sort of represented in average and normal practices and day-to-day experiences, and everybody grows up, and we don't only have to see the growing up story of certain people. And so this the Muslims in Brooklyn can be mirrors for many of your Muslim students, but it's also windows for many of your non-Muslim students who don't know what it's like necessarily. They may have never heard that personal experience of a Muslim growing up, or even among Muslims, because Muslims are so diverse, right? You have African-American Muslims, you have Palestinian Muslims, you have religious Muslims, you have non-religious Muslims. But for people to hear the diverse perspectives, and our goal is to not necessarily essentialize Muslims as one group. As you will see there, it's a quite diverse collection that we have here. So that's a really, really important point. I think we're going to begin. So we're going to start with, we've designed a lesson called Growing Up and Fitting In. And we are going to walk you through a lesson that we designed using the collection of oral histories. So the first oral history that we're going to listen to 2 oral histories today, but we're going to spend a little bit of time on one of them first. And, again, we're approaching this like a short story or like literature. And when we read, and if you really want to engage with the text, you listen or you read more than once. So for the first oral history clip, we're going to listen to it twice. In the last workshop, we approached it differently than the way we're going to approach it today. So we're going to start by showing you a picture of, and Alex, you're going to pull that up, right? Of our narrator that we're going to hear from today. Alex is going to share the screen from our website, and we have a picture of a woman who is let's see, we have Rabia, right? Rabia Asin. She was a student. Alex, can you read her bio?
Sure. Rabia Asin was born in 1991 in Midwood. While studying political science at Brooklyn College as an undergraduate student, she joined the school's Islamic Society of Brooklyn College, as well as the Muslim Women's Education Initiative, both of which were targeted by the New York City Police Department for religiously motivated surveillance by an undercover officer while Asin was a member. She also became an outspoken activist against human rights abuses, including protesting with Brooklyn College's newly formed Students for Justice in Palestine and focusing her studies on surveillance in New York City. She went on to work as a special education teacher at an all-girls secondary school.
Okay, great. So, we chose, I think many of the people that are in this collection are in some ways leaders. And so she's been through a lot. She's experienced a lot growing up in Brooklyn. And this clip, she's referring to, it's a short clip where she talks about her memory of 9/11 and being in school. And, sorry, were you gonna say something, Alex? Before we listen to it, we've seen Rabia's picture. She was wearing hijab during the time she was young, when she was in school. And she was in school and she heard about the attacks in the World Trade Center while she was in school. And then she talks a bit about her experience afterwards. So, like we do with stories, I want you to kind of make a prediction on what do you think you might hear about her experience. You can think to yourself. If anybody wants to share in the chat.
You can share it in the chat, yeah, and we'll read it.
Yeah. What do we think we might hear from Rabia? You might hear some Islamophobia, says Sarah.
Amy said she might be scared.
Okay. You might predict that she was a victim, that she was maybe targeted, that she was maybe attacked. Maybe she experienced some version of prejudice, says Stella. Okay. Perhaps that she wasn't treated fairly.
Or she might be judged how she looks, or that she was uncomfortable.
She might have felt left out. She had to explain herself. These are all really
Thank you so
interesting.
much for all your, I love this. This is great.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna, maybe part of her family were victims. Alex?
And can we ask, part of this lesson also asks students to think about a time where they had trouble fitting in, or a time when they noticed someone else having trouble fitting in. And so we're not going to ask you to share that, but that is the kind of mental space that we want to be in. So if you want to take yourself back to those times where it was awkward, or you had some difficulty fitting in, or perhaps you noticed someone else was having difficulty fitting in, and just think about that experience for a moment. Mm-hmm.
Just a bit of sort of meta moment. The way we design the lesson is we start by asking students to kind of reflect on those moments when they didn't fit in. And then there's sometimes that might be a private journaling experience, and we take some time with that. But in the interest of time, we're kind of making this go by quicker. But then I think, and after that, there's the prediction, right? Where they have to predict. We invite students to predict what they think they might hear. And I think with that, we're gonna go ahead and have a listen to the clip. Alex, what's the time on that clip?
So this clip is a little bit longer. It's 4 minutes and 50 seconds. And so it'll play. Please try and be present. You could turn your camera off, or you can close your eyes. Alternatively, you could read along with the automatic transcript if that's the best for you. But we'll play it through. We'll listen to it all the way through. And then when it gets to the end, we'll have a pause, and then we'll take people's kind of initial reactions to it. All right, away we go.
So can you tell me what you remember of 9/11, of that day, how it unfolded for you?
Sure. I'm laughing now because all these kids were leaving. So I remember I didn't know what had happened. I did know that one of my teachers, I don't remember who it was, but because fifth grade we had like different teachers for different subjects. So my teacher had received a phone call that some crash happened in Manhattan. I had no idea what this crash entailed. Obviously, like all I thought was like, oh, this must be a car crash. Oh, how horrible, a car crash happened in Manhattan. But why did she have to receive a phone call for this? Like, I thought these things had happened normally. And throughout the day, we had students like leave, like their parents were calling them out, and just asking them to come home. And I remember thinking like, oh, mama would never call me home. She would never be like, Rabia, come home, for whatever reason. And actually I didn't realize that those students were being called home because of the crash in Manhattan, whatever that crash may be. I hadn't connected the two. I just thought something other than that had happened, that students are being, called out. And I remember by the end of the day, I was just so upset. There was like maybe like 5 kids left in the class, me being one of them. And I was just so mad at my mom. Like, why didn't she pick me up? Like, why did she let me stay the whole day in school? Later on that day, we found out that, the planes had hit the towers and whatnot. But at the time, I didn't understand the implication of it. I thought, actually, it's so funny because I thought this was like a regular thing. Like, this happens all over the world. Now it's just happening here. I didn't understand really what this would entail. And then the following day we understood, oh, hijacking became something that was a regular part of my language at that point, or after that rather. And then Osama bin Laden, and then understanding that there is a negative connotations to like Muslims being in the news and Osama bin Laden. And I remember like a couple of months after that, I remember kids saying, oh, is Osama in your basement? Are you hiding him? Is he your uncle? And all of these different things that I'm sure that hundreds, if not thousands of like Muslim New Yorkers especially had to probably deal with.
How did you deal with it?
I became a bully. So in order to prevent me from being bullied, I became the bully. I was such a, especially like after fifth grade had ended. I remember in fifth grade somebody had like pulled my scarf off, and I cried so much because I felt so violated. Not that I had any real like attachment to the scarf, like definitely not as like a religious thing or not even as like a cultural thing. It was just like, oh, I do this, whatever. But I felt like somebody had violated me because it was a part of me that they had ripped off. But the following year, especially this one kid, he would constantly would like the Osama bin Laden jokes. Like it was so lame. It was like you have like nothing else in your arsenal except this one lame thing that you keep saying. Meanwhile, I'm like literally on your entire life. Like how? But I became a really big bully like in middle school, and a lot of it was because of this fear that if I don't bully, someone's going to bully me.
How did
And
that manifest, your bullying?
I picked on anyone and everyone. I would say I was pretty witty, and so I could like, you know, I don't know. I would just like make fun of people, make fun of the way that they looked, make fun of the way that they did things, or like especially like their level of intelligence. I always hit like wherever I felt like somebody had an insecurity, I would like pick at that. So I was pretty good at finding out insecurities. And and it's interesting because like years later, when I met some of these people in college and just randomly, like totally coincidence, like if I would meet them coincidentally or whatever, I would apologize for being that person. And I remember this one person in college, I randomly saw him, and I remember chasing him down and being like, do you remember me? And he's like, no, I don't. And I was just like, and I had to remind him. And in reminding him, I was crying so much. Like, I bullied you, man. Like, I'm so sorry about the person that I was then. And, explaining myself to him and that I'm different and that I've like repented. And he does not understand anything or did not understand anything that I was saying to him. But I remember crying so much, like, I'm sorry for being that way. And, but I was a bully. I was really mean, but it was survival.
I think just sit with that for a few seconds, a few more seconds. What you said. In the chat, I posted a link to a Jamboard, a Google Jamboard. Alex, do you mind pulling that up? I don't know if any of you have had experience using a Jamboard, but in this space, let's get some reactions as a way for us to see, this is a way for us to see people's reaction in a sort of, that's not in a list where we can see everybody's reactions at once. So you can go to the sticky note. Can you do that? Because I don't think they can see my screen, Alex. And then write a reaction. And then share. Some reactions to Rabia's narration.
Just initial thoughts. What resonated with you? What surprised you?
Yeah, and if you're not comfortable going on the Jamboard, then feel free to just put it in the chat. Thank you, Irma, for sharing your views there.
This is cool. I haven't used one of these in class yet. I might figure out how to use these.
Yeah, it's fine if you're not comfortable. You can just throw in some points in the chat. Okay, the Jamboard. Let's make that shareable. Again, I'll do it one more time.
What an incredible group of people we have here with us this evening. I'm so happy to see all these.
Yeah, sure. Alex, can you read some of these out loud? My eyes are just so terrible.
Sure. There's so many. Okay. It was surprising that she felt bad about the bullying experience, but the bullied person didn't remember her. I feel sad, but I could understand why she made the choices she did. It was survival. So surprised. She looked so soft, but good for her for finding a way to take her power back. She felt cornered and reacted by being the aggressor to preserve herself and keep herself safe. Bullied turned bully felt that she had taken back some power. I'm not surprised. The constant otherness and taunting had to go somewhere. Not saying it's right to do, but something was unleashed within her. I was surprised to hear that she became a bully. My first impression through, and then it gets cut off there. Yes, in school, one of the only ways not to be bullied was to become a bully. What a powerful story. This is different from being bullied for being a nerd, etc. It was surprising to me to know that her response was to become a bully. She retaliated with anger and force. When a person is targeted and experiences prejudice, there are many responses. I feel like I understand why she was a bully. I also think about this impact this had on her years after, feeling the sadness to apologize. It's sad that there wasn't someone there to intervene and address the bullying she received, and that just starts a cycle that can become so dangerous. At first, I was surprised that Rabia became a bully after 9/11. Then I took a minute to think about how the discrimination impacted her. She wanted to protect herself from being hurt. Some of these are really awesome. Surprised, not what I thought she would say. It gave me a different view. I was impressed with how reflective she was. She has grown from the experience. She was a victim while others may have seen her as a villain. It was interesting how it all unfolded for her and how suddenly she was surrounded by this new narrative that was oppressing her, changing her reality in ways she never could have imagined. I have had many problems with bullies as a child and with bullies amongst my students as an elementary school teacher. It was interesting to hear that her reason for becoming a bully was self-defense. I connected with her, becoming a bully as a survival technique. Also sympathized for her. All that guilt, all that fear, being violated, that's very strong. Hurt people hurt people. Great.
These are incredible. And I think that, you know, there are definitely particularities about the Muslim experience after 9/11, but I think that what we're showing and what we're seeing here is that there are certain things that are very particular, like a scarf, right? Like, you know, this, but then there's these universal, like there's this idea of bullying coming from insecurity, and it makes you kind of think about sort of why people bully. So you know, I think gets at some of those ideas that, again, these are stories that, again, mirrors and windows. Were you going to say something, Alex? Read another one?
Oh, no, I just said that there were some nice ones in the chat, like racists look for a reason to be mean and hurtful. And
Yeah.
the use of the word violated was so poignant, especially considering she was so young.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful story. Honesty about pain. I can imagine kids would appreciate her honesty. And Deborah writes, it makes me realize the connection between bullying and insecurity. It gives me perspective on all the bullying that I experience and the resistance from students who I read as hostile, but were actually insecure.
Okay. So moving on, I imagine that you can get into really good conversations with students as we could continue to go down this line of thinking about bullying and sort of how the bullies themselves might be feeling. We're going to move on to the next part of this lesson, which is kind of addressing one of the skills around social emotional learning, which is being able to attach words to emotions, right? Part of the skills of social emotional learning is to really develop a vocabulary of feelings. And we're going to share with you something, I guess a PDF that we will upload to the chat. And I think actually if we could have that in the link, then that would be great. So in the chat, we have an emotion wheel, right? And so this is a sort of like just a tool to think about words that might describe emotions. Okay, so I want you to pull that up, have a look at it, and you might find this useful for the second time we listen. The second time we listen to this, we are going to go through the entire clip again. And this time, as you listen, I want you to we're going to try to collect emotion words that that link to the oral history. So we're going to listen again, but this time, as we're listening, you can attach a word to the second page of the Jamboard. So if you go to the Jamboard and you go to the second page, Alex, you have that? Yeah, you just kind of slide over and you see a picture of Rabia from the website. As we listen, we can throw on words. So this is one of those things that, you know, the virtual experience is going to be challenging, but there are many ways you can do this. Like if we were in a class, we could give you the transcript and then you can highlight the section and then stick a word. You know, you can do sticky notes onto the text, but this is our way of doing it in a virtual setup where we have a Jamboard and the PDF.
This lesson was designed pre-COVID, and so that's how we had designed it pre-COVID, was students would look at the transcript and highlight or transcribed the sections and then add their words of emotions. This is our virtual modification here. Okay, so one more time for Rabia. And here we go.
So can you tell me what you remember of 9/11, of that day, how it unfolded for you?
Sure. I'm laughing now because all these kids were leaving. So I remember I didn't know what had happened. I did know that one of my teachers, I don't remember who it was, but because in fifth grade we had like different teachers for different subjects. So my teacher had received a phone call that some crash happened in Manhattan. I had no idea what this crash entailed. Obviously, like all I thought was like, oh, this must be a car crash. Oh, how horrible, a car crash happened in Manhattan. But why did you have to receive a phone call for this? Like, I thought these things had happened normally. And throughout the day, we had students like leave, like their parents were calling them out, you know, and just asking asking them to come home. And I remember thinking like, oh, mama would never call me home. She would never, she would never be like, Rabia, come home, for whatever reason. And actually I didn't realize that those students were being called home because of the crash in Manhattan, whatever that crash may be. I hadn't connected the two. I just thought something other than that had happened, that students are being, called out. And I remember by the end of the day, I was just so upset. There was like maybe like 5 kids left in the class, me being one of them. And I was just so mad at my mom. Like, why didn't she pick me up? Like, why did she let me stay the whole day in school? Later on that day, we found out that, the planes had hit the towers and whatnot. But at the time, I didn't understand the implication of it. I thought, actually, it's so funny because I thought this was like a regular thing. Like, this happens all over the world. Now it's just happening here. I didn't understand really what this would entail. And then the following day we understood, oh, hijacking became something that was a regular part of my language at that point, or after that rather. And then Osama bin Laden, and then understanding that there is a negative connotations to like Muslims being in the news and Osama bin Laden. And I remember like a couple of months after that, I remember kids saying, oh, is Osama in your basement? Are you hiding him? Is he your uncle? And all of these different things that I'm sure that hundreds, if not thousands of like Muslim New Yorkers especially had to probably deal with.
How did you deal with it?
I became a bully. So in order to prevent me from being bullied, I became the bully. I was such a, especially like after 5th grade had ended. I remember in 5th grade, somebody had like pulled my scarf off. And I cried so much because I felt so violated. Not that I had any real like attachment to the scarf, like definitely not as like a religious thing or not even as like a cultural thing. It was just like, oh, I do this, whatever. But I felt like somebody had violated me because it was a part of me that they had ripped off. But the following year, especially this one kid, he would constantly would like those Osama bin Laden jokes. Like it was so lame. It was like you have like nothing else in your arsenal except this one lame thing that you keep saying. Meanwhile, I'm like literally on your entire life. Like how? But I became a really big bully like in middle school, and a lot of it was because of this fear that if I don't bully, someone's going to bully me.
How did that manifest, your bullying?
I picked on anyone and everyone. I would say I was pretty witty, and so I could like, I don't know, I would just like make fun of people, make fun of the way that they looked, make fun of the way that they did things, or like especially like their level of intelligence. I always hit like wherever I felt like somebody had an insecurity, I would like pick at that. So I was pretty good at finding out insecurities. And it's interesting because like years later when I met some of these people in college and just randomly, like totally coincidence, like if I would meet them coincidentally or whatever, I would apologize for being that person. And I remember this one person in college, I randomly saw him, and I remember chasing him down and being like, do you remember me? And he's like, no, I don't. And I was just like, and I had to remind him, and in reminding him, I was crying so much. Like, I bullied you, man. Like, I'm so sorry about the person that I was then. And, explaining myself to him and that I'm different and that I've like repented, and he does not understand anything or did not understand anything that I was saying to him. But I remember crying so much, like, I'm sorry for being that way. And, but I was a bully. I was really mean, but it was survival.
These are great words. Some that are on that wheel, and many that aren't. I think the wheel is just like a sort of cheat sheet for students who might want some extra words to throw in.
This would be a great thing. I'm looking at this and I'm like, this would also be a great thing for like a word cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
How I'm like, oh, can I organize these right now? Is it like bugging anyone else that like they're not all like organized by category or color or something?
Well, this would also be, also throw your ideas in the chat on things that you can do with this, but it gives you a lot of raw material to work with students. You can have them organize it. You can make a copy of it and have them come up with stuff. You can have them sort of make their own word wheel. But it gives us a lot of words to work with. And there's so many ways you can work with these words.
Habiba, just to bring it back to kind of the theme that you introduced in the beginning about mirrors and windows, can you talk a little bit about how this activity fits into that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is you can in terms of these words, right? You can do words that you felt when you were listening, right? Your own feelings. You can also, in terms of describing your own feelings, and then you can look at words that Rabia used to see like which words do you think can you relate to? You're not expected to necessarily relate to everything. Some of these things are very different for you.
It's kind of like what we did was like in the first one when we just asked you your reaction, that was a little bit more of asking you to use Rabia as the mirror. People reacted with how it resonated with them and what they saw of themselves. And we saw that in some of the sharing. Here we're looking, when we asked people to really look at her emotions, that was really using it as a window, kind of looking into Rabia and trying to really just stick with her words and her emotions. And to just think about the different ways that you can deploy the oral history in your classroom and to use with students, and the multiple kind of learning goals that you can hit with this. I'm actually teaching English this semester, so I'll be using this clip on Friday to talk about how identity impacts what it means to come of age. So we're going to be thinking about how Rabia's identity as a woman, as a Muslim person in New York City was impacted, and as coming of age, how it was impacted by her identity. So I'm blown away with all of the participation. I'm like, can we get this into a word cloud now? I think this is so cool. Yeah, we're studying Bildungsroman genre in English. So we're all coming of age stories. And we're using this as a kind of transition text.
Okay. So I think we're going to move on to another oral history. And for the next oral history that we're going to listen to, it's with another person in our collection, but she did not grow up in Brooklyn. She actually grew up in Texas, but she currently lives in Brooklyn. So we're just going to listen to this, but again, the theme is growing up and fitting in. So this is Basira Khan, who's an artist.
This one we're going to listen to, and then we're going to transit, and then I'm going to take over from Habiba, and we're going to do another activity that you can use with the oral histories, which I'll introduce after we listen. This oral history clip is called A Unicorn in All the Spaces.
I didn't really have a childhood. I worked a lot. I was like helping my mom sew, or I was like, being the person who cleaned the house and like helped make the food, mowed the lawn, did the laundry. I was just sort of like a part of a big working system. So I didn't have friends. People thought I was weird. People thought I smelled weird. It was a lot of bullying. And I was bullied primarily by girls. And teachers who were usually female. So I had to overcome that in and of itself, of being othered by my own kind. And then being othered by people who looked the opposite of me, or like looked American, and like, even though I probably looked just American and fine, but I wasn't given a space of inclusion. And so I kind of like was a unicorn in all the spaces. And I still feel that way. I still feel like there isn't a place for me. There's like no there. But I feel like truly independent and like I have a voice. So I realized like I am the there, and like people find homes in the spaces I make. So that's kind of what I'm trying to think of now. It's like, oh, I'm the space. So people find a space here. And that's why I think the work I do is so important. But I have to think that the work I do is important. Otherwise, it makes no sense.
Okay. Basira is an artist, conceptual artist. Happy to share reactions, just quick reactions to this oral history. Anything that surprised you or resonated with you. There, yeah. We'll wait till after that. Strong woman, she owns herself. Love the theme of bullying. That the voice change at the end was powerful. Thank you, Susan. That pulls into one of our teaching points about the uses of oral history and what makes them such incredible teaching tools.
Sandhya was asking how old she was, or actually, I mean, she's currently like in her 40s or 30s, but
I don't know.
In this thing, I'm not sure. I'm thinking teenager.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just reading through all these comments. I can read them out so everyone can hear. Heartbreaking. I'm wondering why she felt othered by her own community. I am a unicorn in all places. I am the place. Teachers making her feel bad too, along with other children. Very relatable, not fitting in, feeling like you have no place. I can relate. It's a horrible feeling, feeling invisible. The role we educators have in our students' experiences, so much focus on the good, but we can be incredibly damaging as well. Being othered by my own kind, such a powerful sentence. Yes. There's a lot in here. And this one is, Sandhya, I think a lot of kids feel othered by their own community if they don't fit what they are supposed to be. I think that's incredible.
Martha says she's in awe of her thinking, and I'm too. I mean, I think this is, it's so short and it says a lot. Right?
Yeah.
You just want to hold it.
Deborah.
The thing about oral history is that it's ephemeral, right? It goes into the air, into the vibrations. But yeah.
But we're running low on time, so I want to make sure that we get to the activity. So now these are some ways we've deployed oral histories. You can see, I think, the potential for how rich these are and how they inspire discussions and reactions. And often the reactions are emotional, the first ones. And there's something about hearing a person's voice that pulls that out of us. And so if you're, what we would do in the lesson plan was we would kind of have done that journaling about thinking about growing up and fitting in. Then we all would have listened to Rabia as a whole group and done a reaction. And then small groups would have had any number of oral histories. There's at least 10 clips in this lesson that all relate to the theme of growing up and fitting in. And the small groups would listen to them and compare and contrast those clips that they listened to with Rabia's, and then you'd have a kind of discussion. And so I'm here now to talk about what are kind of summative activities that you can do with your students that help you evaluate what they've learned and assess their understanding of the topics that you've just discussed. So I'm going to discuss two of them, and then we're going to do the third. So in this lesson, the one thing that you could do and that we invite teachers to do is that you could ask your students for homework to write an advice letter to one of the narrators. Have them take the position of, like, what would you say to Rabia to help her? Or what would you say to Basira to make her feel better? What kind of advice would you want to give to her? You put them in the role of being empathy and providing that support and that guidance. That's one. The other thing that we suggest are using these oral history transcripts, their words, to make poetry. And so you know, remember those good old, you know, pre-COVID days. We did this with the teacher workshop, and one thing we offer is cutout poetry or collage poetry. So what I'm sharing now on my screen are examples from a teacher workshop where we gave teachers the transcripts and some nice kind of cardstock, scissors, and a whole bunch of other stuff, and they made these collage poems. So here you can see the unicorn is obviously the from the transcript of Unicorn and All the Spaces here. People thought I smelt weird as the horn up here, but then the head is independent. I have a voice. I'm the space. And the legs are, you know, I worked a lot. And so it demonstrates understanding and an interpretation of the poem. This other poem is from an oral history that we didn't listen to, an oral history titled Salat from a narrator called Edith Braithwaite, and they just kind of took the words and split it up, and it's got a little bit more of a, the way they presented it is a little bit more of like a metric poem here. This is again with the Salat oral history. This one adds a little bit more creative elements here. These are two different interpretations of another oral history. I really like this one that took, oh, this is the Blackout Poetry, and this is what we're gonna do next. So this is Blackout Poetry, where they actually combined some mediums here. So they did Blackout Poetry, but they also cut out all of the idiosyncratic parts of speech, all the likes, and they put it all over, and I just really enjoyed that one. So what we're going to do is create a blackout poem with the words of one of our narrators. And so here's my example. I created this blackout poem just earlier today as part of preparing for this workshop. And I used the Unicorn and All the Spaces transcript. And when we have a chance to do this, I'm going to ask you to make either a mirror poem or a window poem. So use the words of the narrator to either express a mirror, what in that narrator's voice and words, how do you see yourself reflected in those words, and choose those words and black out the others. Or, as I did here, I made a window poem. And this is what I saw and what resonated with me when I heard Basir Khan's. And so I'll just read it just quickly, and then I'll explain how we're going to do this. Childhood was a lot. Helping mom, cleaned the house, make the food, mowed the lawn, did the laundry. Big working. Bullying, usually female. Othered by my own kind, othered by American. A unicorn in all the spaces. There. I realize people find homes. I make the space. So important to laughter. Okay, so that was my window poem. That's what the words that kind of jumped out to me and how I expressed my understanding of that poem. So in 12 short steps, you too can do this with your students. It's a somewhat logistically complicated process on the internet, but we're going to walk you through it. The first thing you'll need is this great link here, which will be shared in the chat shortly. It's called the Blackout Poetry Maker. Yay. Blackout Poetry Maker. You'll also need the words of the transcript. And so that's something like this. There's 2 Google documents that are the text only. So what you'll do is you'll pick one of the transcripts, chat texts only. So there's one for a unicorn in all spaces, and there's one for Becoming the Bully, the text only. You see those links are in the instruction. Open up one. Choose one to work with, basically. You're gonna work with a unicorn in all spaces, or you're gonna work with Becoming the Bully. Okay. Once you've picked your poem, you're going to select all of the text, copy it, come over to the Blackout Poetry Maker and paste it into the custom text field and hit enter text.
So all of the instructions, Alex, are in that chat
Yep.
section where it says instructions for completing Blackout Poetry.
I teach,
Yes.
I did this with my students who have language-based learning disabilities at a virtual lesson. It took like 40 minutes. It took a
To get them to do this part.
There's a lot of instructions. In class, it's super easy. You print out the transcript, you hand them black markers, and you let them go. It's slightly more logistically complicated in the virtual hour. So you've copied the text, you've pasted it into the custom text field on the Blackout Poetry Maker, and you've hit enter text. What that's done is it's now populated the center field with the text. The next step is to create your poem. You do that by clicking on the words you don't want to black out. So, childhood helping my mom clean the house, okay? And then you hit, once you're done, you scroll through, you click all the words you want. I'll just click on some random ones just to demonstrate. And then you hit blackout.
The text to copy and paste, Natalie is, can you post that instructions again one more time?
Yep. So they're in step 2. They're in step 2 of that to make a blackout poem instructions.
So I'll just copy and paste. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. So now just the text to copy and paste is that last chat message from Center for Brooklyn History.
Okay, great. And you know, this is one of those things like in class, it can be complicated because we even saw this in the teacher workshop, whereas, you know, there's some people who can be very quick and think through this and do this fast. And for some people, you know, others might really want and need a lot of time to look and think. So I anticipate the same would be for you all right now as well. But,
right, because now you've created a blackout poem, but none of us can see it. So you go down here to hit render full text, and it creates an image. And now just a few short steps more, and you can share it with everyone. You right click on it, you save the image as, save it as the thing, something that you'll know what it is. And then we're gonna share a Padlet link for then you to upload that image, and then we can all see it. Yeah, and just the response to the question in the text, thank you, Habiba. So while people are working on their blackout poems, making either a window or a mirror, I will show the website here. So when you're on the website, you can come to this Meet the Narrators page. You can see everyone's faces here. You can pick someone, and then their oral history clips come below their biography. So here's another one from Rabia called Language of Intelligence. Got this link, see this clips, oral history clips, interactive transcript. And here you can also access their view transcript PDF. And here, this is copy and pasteable. So you can copy and paste from these PDFs to whichever one of the oral history clips you prefer to use for this blackout poetry activity.
And of course, these are all free digital tools for which you can use any kind of text. Again, these are all ways of engaging students with text, and it can be a text from your social studies textbook, you know, like a paragraph. I mean, these are all just, but our goal here is to engage with these words, and that sometimes when you give students words to work with, they have sort of a leg up on maybe even kind of thinking through their own words and their own ideas and rearranging words. So
the last thing that I want to mention is this teacher toolbox, which is on the muslims.brooklynhistory.org website. This is for you. Here are all of our lesson plans. If you were at the previous session, and there should be one now on the YouTube page for Brooklyn Public Library, yeah. We did listening as a creative act, which was our introduction lesson to using oral histories with students. You can go see Habiba and I lead the similar workshop about that. Then there are other thematic lessons that we hope you can just drop into your curriculum where they are appropriate. The best neighborhood, for example, if you're teaching grades 2 in New York City who study neighborhoods in our community. There's a lesson on Eid and Ramadan. This is the lesson we did today, growing up and fitting in. A lesson on migration. A lesson on belonging in Brooklyn. A lesson on after 9/11, the political is personal. And finally, just a generic lesson on how to use any of the clips to create blackout or collage poetry. Additionally, all of the clips that are a part of the curriculum are here. If you don't want to use any of our lessons and you just want to use these great, incredible clips, you come right here and you can find short one-sentence summaries and titles of the clips. No clip is longer than 8 minutes. So they're all meant to be used within like a 40-minute teaching period. And finally, there's an additional resources page that includes short essays that would be appropriate for high school learners, college learners, and most importantly, adult learners. This was our place for if you feel uncomfortable or that you want to kind of strengthen your background knowledge on Black American Islam or on racial profiling and the war on terror, Muslim holidays and celebrations, kind of a brief timeline of Muslims in America, or the role of women in Islam, that this is a place that you can come and read and feel a little bit more confident before you begin introducing these clips with yourself. There's a ton of other features on the website, which I have a dwindling amount of time to go over, but there is a timeline that you can share with students. There are interactive maps that integrate oral histories into the maps. So here's the one on growing up and fitting in. And we can zoom in here. And it maps narrators' oral histories with spots, geographic locations in Brooklyn. Bridging generations, we don't look Muslim. You're just like you. So these are all resources available for the incredibly low price of free here on our website. We are eager for you to use them. We're eager for you to hear them. And just to kind of reiterate what we did today was, you know, the purpose of the Growing Up and Fitting In lesson plan, again, we said is not to teach about what Islam is, though I think you could probably see how you might integrate these or use them as launching pads to think about how you might teach Islam or introduce different aspects. Here we really worked on listening, our skills of empathy, and our skills as critical readers of literature, and as we built our cultural competency. We learned about how to see people and what we see in people who might be very different from ourselves. Habiba, do you have any final words? There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, it's about how do we, when can you use them? You know, I would encourage you to just explore these. And the lessons that we designed, I would encourage you to look and read through the different lessons that we designed. I think that how you use them depends on what you're teaching, right? If, for example, you're doing high school social studies, I think the unit on migration stories could be really good, or if you're doing 8th grade social studies. I think for ELA, they can be used I think, throughout any ELA class, depending on what you're doing. I mean, Alex, you're saying you're using it as a sort of pre-reading activity for a book.
I can be real specific. Like my class is about to read Colson Whitehead's Nickel Boys. And it's in, our whole theme in the 9th grade is Bildungsroman literature, or, coming of age novels. And so we're going to listen to Rabia's oral history, and then we're going to listen on Friday, and we're going to think about how her identity impacted her coming of age. And then there's another oral history that we're going to use. It is called, it's from Fahim Abdul-Wasi, who's here on the screen. It's called Racial Strife in the City. And in it, Fahim describes growing up as a teenager in the 1980s. He mentions some very famous instances of both police brutality and vigilante violence, Eleanor Bumpurs, Michael Griffith, and talks about as a young man and his budding racial consciousness. And so we'll listen to that, and we'll think about how his identity impacted his coming of age, and then we'll be in the right headspace to start reading our novel. And so I think if you go to our lessons and you click on the Growing Up and Fitting In lesson, right at the beginning of the lesson is a list of the clips that we recommend for using in the lesson with a quick analysis. So you see here, today we looked at Becoming the Bully, and we looked at A Unicorn in All the Spaces. But actually in this lesson, there's, as you can see, a large list of oral histories from which to choose. So You're Just Like Yourself by Muhammad Fayez describes their experiences as a gender fluid child in a traditionally Muslim family. The Bridge Generation, Asad Dandia describes growing up in a Pakistani neighborhood in Brooklyn. In Friends Who Are Guys, which is one of my favorite oral histories, I highly recommend it. Shahana Hanif is an incredible narrator. She challenges different standards of behavior for boys and girls in her community. So when we designed the curriculum, we really designed it to be as modular as possible. Find whatever you kind of need, hopefully you can easily find on the website, and then drop it in with hopefully little effort, or as little effort as possible, to make it work in your lesson. So there are different ways to filter. You can choose by grade level or lesson plan. And then when you click on an oral history, you can also, they all have tags here. So if you're looking for oral histories about 9/11, it will bring up all the clips that were related to 9/11. And so on. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of, we were being really thoughtful, like I'm a teacher myself, so we're being really thoughtful to think about like how teachers actually use resources and making sure that this website delivered resources that were easily usable, because that's really what we want. We want people to do. We want, Muslim voices in your classroom.
And not just on 9/11, or not just on Eid.
Not just on
and Muslim. So that's why if you read through the lesson plans, you can see ways that it can be included in like classes of government, ELA, advisory even, especially like the Growing Up and Fitting In one.
Yeah, or language, or that I think that was kind of one of our challenges, right? Was how do we make a curriculum about Muslims in Brooklyn in which one of the premises is that Muslims are just like everyone else? That's why we've made this special curriculum all about them. And so that's why we decided when our lesson plans are for the most part thematic. So Linda Sarsour here describes her neighborhood, Sunset Park, as being the best neighborhood in Brooklyn, and why it's the best neighborhood. And so,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
It goes along, this particular lesson goes along with the second grade social studies standard of studying your neighborhood. All right. So if you do neighborhoods in second grade, this is a lesson that can work.
Yeah, you don't, yeah. And if you don't use anything that we said, you can at least use Linda's oral history to introduce it with your students and talk about what does Linda say is the best neighborhood, what makes the best neighborhood, right? And those are appropriate conversations for second graders. You could also use Linda's clip in other classes, I think. We are at like 10 minutes before, and I know that I think, Caitlin has to get back on to talk about paperwork and other logistics.
Oh, can you just share the screen of the Blackout Poetry, because we have some nice ones.
Oh, yeah.
Pleased to see that some of you were able to crank some out, crank out some poetry.
Oh, and people put titles on them too. Extra credit. That's even better. I didn't even say that, but of course you did.
Margie Ho, I'm reading your comment too. The 8th grade ELA teachers do farewell to Manzanar, and I'm thinking about the book Intermittent by Samira Ahmed. Great, and how you can make parallels to it and use an opportunity to address the Muslim community so much. Okay, yeah, absolutely. It can, I think going along with a book, that's a great, there's another book called Watched. That's a YA book that is good for potentially high school or ELA, which correlates so perfectly with Asad Dandia's oral history about surveillance in Brooklyn. But
these poems are exceptionally beautiful. I'm going to start tearing up.
You're going to read some out loud?
I don't know if I can make it through a whole one.
Okay.
Here's one I like. I like this one. Do you remember me? No, I don't. I was crying so much. I'm sorry about the person I was. I'm different. He does not understand, or did not understand. But I remember crying so much. I'm sorry for being that way. But I was a bully. But it was survival.
Wow. These are incredible. They're incredible. I think your students would enjoy doing this and seeing each other's poems. Alex, you're going to read that one?
I'm just, doing my poet thing. Okay. I became a bully. Became the bully. I felt so violated. Like a religious, cultural thing. Felt violated constantly. It was so lame. Because of fear. Years later, I would apologize. I'm so sorry. I'm different. I'm sorry. Was mean, but it was survival. I don't think I can. I could read them all. How late do you guys want to stay on the Zoom tonight?
There's a lot of pressure in creative writing to come up with the words, but I think that there's something about this, which is like a crutch, but it's still a valid poem. It's still an expression to do Blackout. And so personally, I have always liked the idea of having a library of words to work with, to create a voice through the words of others. And I think this is what these tools can help us do. How are we at? I think, do we need to pass the mic to Caitlin?
Caitlin's nodding yes. So.
Unfortunately, yes. But we will share all these things with you after the event. I mean, you all have already received, of course, the booklet and materials, but we'll also share the Blackout Poetry so you can see what was put together and the other resources that we made tonight. So you have some tools in your bag to use when you're working with your students. I just want to give like a virtual, like, I don't know, round of applause to our amazing presenters tonight. If you have a reactions button, I'm just gonna go ahead and do some clapping on behalf of all of us. This was an extremely powerful workshop. and so useful too, like it, yeah. So I'm speechless. Thank you, Alex and Habiba, for this amazing work. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment, and I realize we didn't really get to questions that much, but if you all have any questions, I would ask that you pose those to us at connections@bklyn. I'm just going to type this in here, library.org, and we can always forward them on to Alex and Habiba and try to get back to you, because I know we didn't have that opportunity.
Can I also just express my gratitude to all of the participants here who have, one, stayed on for the entire session, woohoo, and two, has just like produced and generated and did all the things that we asked. It worked better than we could have imagined. And just thank you all for being here this evening in December.
And we would have loved to hear from you, but given the size of the group, that's a little more complicated, like to see you and have you interact and talk, but the size of the group makes that a little challenging. But thank you for sticking it through and for all of your participation.
Yes, thank you all. So a few details about some upcoming workshops, and then also the very essential detail about your evaluation that you can use to share what you thought about today. We will certainly take your feedback very seriously, and we will use it to inform or help inform our next and final workshop in the Muslims in Brooklyn series, which is happening on Wednesday, January 27th. So we have a little break between now and then, and it's going to be on perspectives in policing. So we hope that you will join us, that you will spread the word, and as I said, that you will give us some feedback. A few other events, not related to Muslims in Brooklyn, but we have a workshop called Putting Brooklyn on the Map, which will showcase digital maps and virtual learning. And then lessons from pandemics past, what the Spanish flu can teach us about the current pandemic that we're all living through. And that's going to be really special. We're going to have the author, Kenneth Davis, of More Deadly Than War. So some very topical opportunities to engage with your students. And of course, I would like to promote New York City History Day. The Center for Brooklyn History is this year's host of the virtual competition. It's a phenomenal way to virtually engage your students in project-based learning. So if you're interested at all, please check out our website and reach out to us. We would love to have you join us. And then here we go. Here's the link to our evaluation. If you would like CTLE credit, you must fill out this evaluation in order to receive it. So please do fill it out, and you'll have the option at the end of the survey to let us know if you need CTLE credit. We will likely send that CTLE credit in the next 2 weeks, only because we have such a large group. So that'll be coming up soon. And then regardless, we would just really, really, really appreciate your feedback. So on behalf of us all, I just want to say thank you. And we'll be sticking around for a few more minutes. If anybody has questions while we're here, again, feel free to use the chat feature. And we certainly hope we'll see you after the new year. So wishing you a very happy holidays and a good new year. Thank you, everyone. I just saw someone asked in the chat if the first part of Muslims in Brooklyn will be offered again. We actually have a recording of that on our YouTube channel, so you can revisit that even if you were not able to attend. If you look up, perhaps we can try to pull up the link real quick, but we'll also we'll send that in the follow-up email. We'll send the link to the first workshop.
It was just as good. Maybe. It was hard to rank them. I'm gonna head out, friends. Good night.
Good night,
Thank you
Alex.
so much,
Thank you.
Alex.
Yeah, I will head out too.
And Habiba, wonderful, so
Um,
wonderful. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Friends, we're
all.
almost at Christmas break. We're almost
Yes.
there. Almost
Have a
at winter
happy
break.
holiday.
Yes, and Hanukkah starts this week, Friday, right?
Oh yes, it's the holiday season, man. I'm ready for a vacation. Some time off. All right, guys. Good night.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's see. Is Jonathan Spear still on here? No, he's not. My former colleague at the New York City Museum School. And worked with Sonnet. All right. Good night, everybody.
Jen, I have to head off as well. Thank you for shutting everything down at the end. Thank you, Julia. Bye, everyone. Have a good
guys.
night.
Good night, everyone.